Alright, looks like we're back again. Thanks for joining me again. Thank you for watching these videos. I really do like it when I get a bit of feedback on how you're going with them. Um, Currently, what we're going to be looking at today is the respiratory system. Now, the respiratory system is kind of a tricky one, and it might be a little bit more difficult to get your head around than the digestive system because it's a little bit more complex, because we're starting to learn a little bit more about the specifics of how we breathe and why it's important to breathe and that sort of stuff. So, again, I'm going to try and take it very slow and try to explain everything as much as I possibly can so that you can get a well informed opinion on the respiratory system, I guess. Um, yeah, let's get started. Why not? Let's do it. All right, click through. All right, so these are our learning intentions or our goals. By the end of this lesson, by the end of like the lesson plus the style modules, we want to be able to describe the main functions and components of the respiratory system. So what actually makes up the respiratory system? We want to be able to identify the muscle movements that make us breathe. So there's a particular muscle movement that helps us to breathe, and we'll learn a little bit about that. The last one is we want to explain how oxygen is absorbed into our blood and how carbon dioxide is removed from the blood. So um, I think possibly by now you know that we breathe in oxygen and we breathe out carbon dioxide. So we want to find out why that works, why that happens, how it works. And that's basically the goal of the respiratory system, is doing that. So we'll go on again. So the respiratory system, it's responsible for taking in oxygen, which is O2. Um, yeah, we've done the topic on elements, so you probably know what oxygen is. We've got the O2 together, so that's just two oxygen molecules that are just like stuck together through an electron. Basically, they sort of share an electron. Um, they're responsible for taking in the oxygen and getting rid of carbon dioxide. So we take in oxygen, we breathe in, we go, we take in that oxygen, and then we breathe out carbon dioxide. It's very, very important for our survival of the respiratory system. After about 5 to 10 minutes of our respiratory system not working properly, so maybe we go into an asphyxiation. So, for example, some people with allergies to like fish will have an anaphylactic reaction, and that anaphylactic reaction comes from that word asphyxiation. So, anaphylactic reaction basically is like the body starts to see something as a threat, and it'll inflame and basically stop the respiratory system from working, um, because the immune system can be weird sometimes. Um, Nonetheless, 5 to 10 minutes after you have less oxygen going to the brain, you're very likely to develop a serious and permanent brain damage. So, um, yeah, it's very important. If you're not breathing for up to 5 to 10 minutes, you have permanent brain damage. There's no coming back from that. It's very, very important that our respiratory system works. So what does it look like? This is kind of what it looks like. Now, hopefully you can see my mouse again. I try to make sure that the quality is decent so that you can see that, but who knows? This is what it sort of looks like. We start out up the top here. So this is sort of where we start off with. We have our oral cavity, so our mouth. We have our nostril, and we also have our nasal cavity. We have our pharynx. Now, the pharynx is sort of just sitting there, and we have our larynx. Now, the larynx is what we use to talk with. We create the vibrations with that. Nonetheless, it starts out with this main part where we take in oxygen. It goes into this thing called the trachea. Now, the thing you might notice about the trachea is it kind of looks weird. Now, these things here, I want you to, like everyone here, I reckon, has seen a vacuum cleaner before. If you remember like a vacuum cleaner with the the tube on it that has, it kind of looks a bit like this, the tube that we're talking about. Um, there's a video later on in this presentation that you can click on, and it'll show you a pluck, and the pluck has the trachea there, and you can see what it looks like. It's kind of cool. Nonetheless, we'll keep going. So we have the trachea. So the air comes in here, passes through into our trachea, and then it branches off. And it branches off into these bronchi. or bronchole, or bronchus. So we have a left one and we have a right one. We have a right lung and we have a left lung. There's a couple of things that aren't shown here called bronchioles and alveoli, but we'll get into those. The last thing here we need to look at is the diaphragm. Now the diaphragm is really, really important for a reason, and we'll get into that. So what is respiration? So respiration is the process in our cells where oxygen is converted to carbon dioxide, or not necessarily like converted. It is exchanged. Oh no, in the actual process of respiration, yeah, oxygen is converted to carbon dioxide. The chemical formula for respiration is oxygen plus glucose, and this little arrow just means it's converted to carbon dioxide and water. So we take in oxygen, we take in glucose, so that's just sugar. So we take in oxygen and sugar, a reaction happens in our body, and we produce carbon dioxide and water. Now we breathe out that carbon dioxide, and that water is just recycled into our body. We eat food, we breathe in oxygen, and we make energy available for our body. So we make energy available for our body to do things. And as a result, we produce carbon dioxide and water. Why is it important to get rid of carbon dioxide? I felt it was important to go talk to this from the get-go. Why is it important to get rid of carbon dioxide? So we know we breathe it out. We know we produce it. Why is it important to get rid of it? Carbon dioxide in our blood actually dissolves as a thing called carbonic acid. Now, carbonic acid in itself isn't that bad. If you have a bottle of Pepsi or a bottle of soda water or something like that, there's carbonic acid in there. What carbonic acid will do though is it'll lower the pH of the body's blood. We basically want a pH of 7. If we increase the pH goes down to a pH of 2 or 3. And I talked about this when we were talking about the stomach. Having a low pH can be bad for our body and can lead to a process like a condition such as acidosis. Now, have a Google of that and find out what that is if you'd really like to, but that's just an example of what having a low pH can do to our body, or in particular, our body's blood. At high levels, carbon dioxide is therefore toxic. So we want to get rid of it. We don't want that carbonic acid in our blood. If we can manage it, we want a nice, even, neutral pH of 7. Read that. Breathing is an automatic process. You were, before just now, breathing automatically. You weren't thinking about it. But now, you're aware of it. You actually have to think about your breathing. You're no longer breathing automatically. Soon enough, your breathing will return to normal and you'll stop thinking about it. But when you think about breathing, it stops becoming automatic. You don't have to think about breathing until you start thinking about it, more or less. So how does this all work? So in a simplified way, hopefully I can simplify this well enough so that it makes sense. So breathing happens when your diaphragm, so if we go back a bit, this thing here, this thing contracts. And when this thing contracts, it pulls the lungs up. It pulls the lungs out. So when breathing happens, your diaphragm, which is underneath the lung, it contracts and moves downwards. This drags the lungs down and increases their space. So if you could imagine me pulling a balloon, if I pull the bottom of a balloon, it will increase the space in that balloon. And it means that oxygen, if it wanted to, it can go into that space. It's a really interesting way that it can do that. There's a video there that you can click on in the actual PowerPoint that I'll put up that you can watch and see how that works. So air, the thing that we breathe in, mostly contains oxygen, nitrogen, and carbon dioxide. It goes into your mouth or your nose. It goes down your trachea. So this thing here goes into down your trachea, into the bronchi, into the bronchioles, and we'll learn what they are in a second, into little things called alveoli sacs. So this is what this looks like. So we have the trachea here, we have the bronchi, the two different bronchies. Now, the thing you might notice about these is they kind of look like what you see in plants. If you've seen plants before, they kind of look like this. They have the big veins that start to split off into tinier little veins. And that's exactly what this looks like. It's to increase the surface area of our lungs. So these bronchioles are these little veins that come off like that. Inside the bronchioles, we've gone on and we've had a look at the bronchioles. We have the little alveoli air sacs. Now these are the little sacs where that gas exchange takes place. This is basically what it looks like. We have a couple of veins and arteries that come off the alveoli sacs. So the capillaries bring deoxygenated blood to, or deoxygenated blood, but also blood that's like rich in carbon dioxide because it's gone through that respiration. So it brings the respirated blood, the carbon dioxide blood, to the alveoli, and because there's so much of that carbon dioxide, it wants to go to a place where it wants to try and do this thing called diffuse out. It wants to go to a place where it's less concentrated. So if you imagine you have a glass of water and you put a drop of food coloring in there, and how it tends to like just disperse out, that's the same process. Imagine that this is a drop of food coloring and it goes into our air sacs, goes into the alveoli sac, and that diffuses out. And because there's such a high concentration of carbon dioxide in here, it diffuses that way. And because there's such a high concentration of oxygen here, it diffuses out that way. So this is how that exchange takes place. So as a result, we have this carbon dioxide leaving the blood and oxygen entering the blood as it goes in to our arteries. Now we use those arteries and we pump that around, and we get our ability to put oxygen around our body so that that process, respiration, can take place. So the diffusion of gases, this is sort of like a summarized version of that. In the alveoli, carbon dioxide comes out of the blood via a process called diffusion. Diffusion is the movement of gas or liquid particles from a place of high concentration to a place of low concentration. Because there's a high concentration of oxygen in the alveoli, the oxygen moves to the blood and reoxygenates the blood so that it can be used in respiration. So one of our learning intentions is that we wanted to know what the main components of the respiratory system were and what they do. So the first thing is I've simplified it a bit, but we've got the mouth and the nose. It takes in the air. The trachea, the air moves down it. The bronchi is where the air is split into two different parts. The bronchioles is where, like the veins of a leaf, it splits up the air into even more portions. The alveoli is where the gas exchange takes place. The diaphragm, which is that thing underneath, that's what helps our lungs be able to expand. And the circulatory system is important for this part here, so that we can actually move that carbon dioxide and oxygen around. Okay, so feel free to pause that and get that down if you want to. I'm going to move on. I have a video here that you can watch. You can click on, it's a hyperlink, so it'll just take you to a YouTube video that you can watch. It sort of goes through how that oxygen goes into our body and how it moves around. I have another video here. Kind of looks gross. It is kind of gross. This is a sheep's lung, and basically what this guy does is he gets a air compressor, puts it into the trachea. So the trachea, the lungs, and the heart, which is what a pluck is, has been dissected out of a sheep, and he's put air into it. And you can actually, it's disgusting, but it's awesome how this works. One day, if you decide to go and do biology down the track, you'll actually get to do this experiment. Well, it's not so much an experiment as it is a demonstration, but you'll get to see this demonstration of how the lungs open up. And now this stuff feels like a sponge. It's so cool. You put this into water and it'll just float on the top because it's like a sponge. And it's It's like a sponge so that we have a really high surface area for oxygen and carbon dioxide to diffuse. Um, One of the last things I wanted to leave you on is the disease of the respiratory system. Now this one's asthma. I'm just using asthma as an example because lucky me, I have asthma as well. So in springtime, if you hear me going, it's because I'm having an asthma attack. And it's really, really scary, honestly. But it's a condition where a person's airways inflame, they become narrow, they swell up, and they produce a bit of extra mucus. It makes it really, really difficult to breathe. Having an asthma attack is really, really scary if you don't have a inhaler. So it can produce wheezing, it can produce chest pain, a cough, and it can be life-threatening for people that aren't quite able to handle it that well. It usually requires medicine like a Ventolin, or like Ventolin, a puffer, one of those puffers to treat. But yeah, that's a brief overview of everything. Let's have a look back at our learning intentions. We're able to, by the end of this, you might have to watch this a couple of times, but you should be able to just describe the main components of the respiratory system. We've identified the muscle movement or the diaphragm contracting that makes us breathe, and we are able to explain from those alveoli how oxygen is absorbed into and carbon dioxide is removed from the blood. That's basically what we wanted to be able to do today. And I feel like if you've gone over this and you've had a watch of it and you've done the style modules, hopefully you've gotten enough information to know each of these three things. And I know it's really complex and I know it's kind of tricky to wrap your head around, but you're more than welcome to ask questions about it. And definitely do that if you're having trouble with it, because understanding the respiratory system is really, really handy. Okay, I'm going to leave that there. I'm sorry if I've spoken either too quickly or if you haven't quite got it. If you haven't quite got it, please let me know. Send me an email or just add it to the Google Classroom and I will answer it. Try not to say something like, "Oh, sir, I'm confused." Try to be more specific. Say, "Sir, I understood most of it, but I really don't get what an alveoli does." Try to be more specific about it because it helps me understand where I need to go to be able to help you. Okay? So I'm going to leave it there because sticking at the 17-minute mark seems to be a pretty good idea. Yeah, let me know if you have any questions. I'll leave it there. Thank you for watching. I appreciate that you've watched it. Okay, bye.